talk about this stuff all day. I want to go back to some of your historical perspective, because I love looking at it that way. And it reminds me of a construct that I usually look at, that every decade or so we see a major hardware milestone. And for some reason, just looking at it in a symmetrical way, it always seems to happen at the year 7 of that decade. So 1987, you mentioned the first phone, the Motorola phone, the Dynatac. It wasn't 87, but 87 was the movie Wall Street, where it was kind of a cultural phenomenon where, Michael Douglas had the phone on the beach and everyone was just blown away by that. And then 1997 was the StarTAC, which was, a major push forward and milestone in hardware in terms of flip phones.
Yep.
And then 2007, of course, we know as the iPhone. And it's not just the hardware, but that jump-started the third-party development ecosystem that you mentioned 1 year later, and then what we've seen since then. So I guess my point is that the hardware usually comes first, then the software, and then the kind of cultural acclamation and user behavior that evolves. So with that construct, we're 2 years away from the next 7-year iteration. What are we looking at in terms of hardware? We're at the cusp of wearables. We see a lot of interesting things happening with Oculus VR and the Rift. And, you mentioned Tesla. The car is a mobile device. So, what's your thoughts on hardware as the leading indicator?
So, it's really, I'll just step back just a little bit. If you go back prior to the iPhone, so we're looking at 2005, 6, in that area. If you remember what the smartphones looked like then, they had these little screens and these keyboards, and they had all sorts of different types of sizes and flavors.
My mom still has that phone.
And one of my favorite was the Nokia 6800, the bat phone, right? It was like you twist it, and all of a sudden there was a keyboard on each side, and it looked like the Winged Crusader, and you could type on it. And I actually do like about 80 words a minute on it. It was pretty awesome. And then the iPhone came out, and if you look at all phones today, 99% of them are just going to be a rectangle with a piece of glass on it. And the change that you're seeing right now is the fact that it's all software-based. And that's a good thing, because it doesn't drive you into the legacy issues of having to deal with cost-effectiveness of your hardware. But if you go back to the hardware conversation, so what my premise here is that we're definitely moving to software-described everything. Literally, you're software-defining networks now, you're software-defining cloud-based systems and infrastructure known as cloud, right? It's all software-defined. It's all organized and taxonomized, in software. But from a hardware perspective, truly the 2017 is, in my opinion, is going to be wearables. But it isn't wearables on your wrist, right? It's going to be embedded sensors in your clothing. Mm-hmm. And you're already seeing this. I've seen some great demos. I can't mention the name of the companies, but I've seen some great demos of this technology that's coming. And I think it's real exciting because it really can, like the one example I saw where your cloth would change colors, right? You didn't like the pattern, you could download a software and change the pattern of what you were wearing, which is pretty cool if you're in exercise mode and you want to look a little different. You can do that. So those are there, and I really truly think this next step up is going to be in wearables. But don't just think of it as a watch, or don't think of it just as a healthcare monitor, because that's where the push is today. But it will move into the consumer space and get around fashion. And this is why it's kind of interesting to see what Apple's been doing in this space, because they're really going to move heavily into that market.
Sure. It's interesting, too, when you look at that progression and triangulating it forward. If we had a physical keyboard, now a software-based keyboard, triangulating that forward, it could kind of move to air in terms of projection-based technologies.
I think that's novel.
Sure.
I think it's more going to be, I still think it's going to be a lot more voice control. I think it's going to continue to get better. I think it's going to move into gesture recognition. Sure. You're seeing some stuff that Alan Kay developed 20 years ago. Alan Kay, by the way, is father of the original Apple GUI interface back at Xerox. I saw him speak 20 years ago, and he was already talking about gesture-based interfaces. And it takes about 40 years for that stuff to hit mainstream. Mm-hmm. And you're starting to see it just with the fact that the device itself knows that I'm facing you directly. Right. If I'm in a retail environment and I've got beacons in the retail, it actually knows physically where I'm at in space, plus or minus 6 inches. And that's pretty accurate to do either foot traffic analysis, or the fact that I've been standing there for about 3 minutes might be a good time to notify a retail clerk to come over and to see if I need some assistance.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that gets to my next point, which is the contextual aware stuff that you were talking about. And, we're starting to see that, or hints of what it could be, through certain products that are out there now. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about kind of the best representation of that technology today. A lot of people point to Google Now as kind of a predictive engine, going into your calendar, your email, the weather, bringing together all those data sets and saying, tomorrow you have a flight, there's construction on your normal road to the airport, and it's raining, so leave 20 minutes earlier. In a way that's more of a utility than, bordering on the creepy stuff you mentioned, but a utility.
I love that kind of stuff, and I'm a big advocate of it. And what's fortunate about my role is I cross all industries and all geographies, so I can cross-pollinate between industries. And so I actually have been spending a lot of time in healthcare and pharma. And actually, we see the real, true contextual awareness coming in healthcare first.
Yeah.
Where, for example, if you're diabetic, it helping you pick the appropriate type of restaurants and food that you should be eating based on what your sugar content is in your bloodstream at that time. I saw a really great prototype of an app that was based on the same technology used for Google Translate, is that you would go into a restaurant, you would use your phone, the camera on your phone, you pop up the app, and it would read the whole menu for you and put a check mark next to foods that should be okay for you to eat, right? Based on the fact of what's going on inside of me since my last measurement. So there's going to be this ability to try to, because healthcare is moving away from being reactive, hey, you're sick, I'm going to give you a drug, to being proactive, like, hey, I don't want you to get sick, so I'm going to try to make you be healthier, because that, in essence, makes it a better place and it costs me less money, right? So they're going out with these abilities to help you be a better person, to live a healthier lifestyle, and you're starting to see this. You already see this in the Fitbit trackers and all of that, and now it's going into healthcare and then, of course, into pharma. So, and by the way, they have the money to do that, and the incentive, because the cost associated with keeping us healthy is far less than trying to, cure us.
Now, with that example, and being in a restaurant, and even you mentioned beacons, with all of these things, isn't one of the challenges that we have disparate systems that may or may not talk to each other, different platforms, and they're all trying to establish themselves as the standard, so in that horse race, none of them are cooperating.
And that's exactly it. That's one of the biggest inhibitors to consumer-based Internet of Things, is the fact that everybody has their own ecosystem. They're all trying to be...
There's no WWW protocol standards.
No. Now, there is some good news on the horizon. So this is why, by the way, IoT is going to be industry first. So it's going to be in the commercial space way before it really drive in the consumer side. You're already seeing it in that space. But, for example, what I love is in the auto industry, they just came out with a standard so cars from different manufacturers can communicate to each other in real time. So if two cars are heading to the intersection and it appears like there's going to be a collision, the cars are communicating to each other. It says, okay, you go right, I'm going to go left, so they avoid each other. Now, is this in our cars today? No. It's still in the lab, but you're going to see this in the next 10 years, that these cars will intercommunicate. And by the way, this is really driving towards the autonomous vehicle, which is now, by the way, a new channel for you guys to start advertising in. Why do you think those big screens are going in cars nowadays? That's an opportunity for you a couple years down the path, because people won't be driving. They will be able to see that billboard.
Absolutely.
And pop it by. They wouldn't be their phone. They would just have the car who's recording everything around them. They would just select it on the screen and it would grab it and bring you in that advertisement.
Then we're in Minority Report.
It's getting really creepy.
It reminds me, too, of an anecdote, and I might get the actual dates wrong, but I think it was around 1908 in the state of Pennsylvania. There were two automobiles, and they got in an accident with each other.
My son must have been driving one of them.
Yeah, right. So I think that there's a lot of backlash to self-driving cars, but human operators aren't, the end-all solution either. So you mentioned Internet of Things. Let's leave on that note. There's a lot of talk about that, the connected home, all these other things. A lot of great kind of early indications of what we can see there, like Nest, and other technologies. Also a little bit of irrational exuberance and what I think is going to be an overload of message overload. The example I always give is that, my fridge telling me that the milk has soured. I don't necessarily need that because milk already has that biological function to tell me when that happens. So what are your favorite kind of IoT examples that you've seen so far that are either kind of emerging or in the marketplace today?
So just two things. So yes, I'm a geek. I wear a propeller at the house and I fly around and do crazy stuff. I have 125 IP addresses in my house. That means I have 4 things that are connected And by the way, nothing is connected on the same platform. There's like, little here, little there. It's all over the place.
Right.
Right. And I walk in the room, I turn on the light, and I actually use a scripting language called IFFT that will go out and set the fact when I walk in the room, it will turn on the light, and then the music will start playing. But there's a delay, right? And if it was all in the same ecosystem, there wouldn't be that delay. So I do understand where that is. But going back to things that I've seen that are cool, and I agree with you, you're going to get this notification spam that's just you're going to ignore it and shut it off. But I'll go back to the refrigerator example. I saw one that was really cool. It was just really innovative. And I saw this at CES. And it was the fact that, and it happens to me all the time, I'm at the grocery store. My wife has sent me something to go get, and I get that. And then it's like, oh, I think she said something else, but I don't remember what she said, right? And that you can literally log onto your refrigerator. It has a camera inside. It has like 2 or 3 cameras inside, so you can actually see what's in your refrigerator from your mobile phone. Now, that isn't rocket science. You don't have to do a lot, but it's something like, wow, that's just really cool, because that's something I could use to get through me walking in the door. Like, well, didn't you get X, Y, Z? Well, couldn't you have answered the message that I sent you to ask you what I needed to pick up? So it's those types of things are really cool. And then the other things we're seeing is really around environmentals, right? Really managing your energy consumption to make it more community-based. The fact that all of this energy is being utilized, and if you're in an area that's under strict guidelines for water consumption, for example, it can monitor and let you know that, hey, you're not doing your community part here. You need to reduce your water intake a little bit. Because some people, honestly, they just don't know. And so that information helps them. And even if you give them information, it doesn't mean they're going to act on it. But at least for those that want to, they have that option to opt in.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff. And I wish we could talk about this stuff all day long, but we're out of time. So please join me in thanking Daniel. And you'll be available for conversations. I'm sure there are a lot of people that want to talk to you.